I'm one of 9 children. Grew up in a very poor family in an industrial Midwest city. So I grew up in a life of poverty. Went away to a small private liberal arts college out in a rural part of the state. I had never stayed a night at home before I went to college for the first time, so I'm out there. I had never met a minority before in my life, because I'm now out there. I went to racially segregated schools, and so I'd always been just around black people. And I go out there. And some of you may have heard this story, so after 2 days I went home. But ultimately, through a series of incidents, mainly my mother, I went back. Sometimes you ever get those sort of options offered to you that you know you only have one. Well, that was one of those situations. Went back, and there's something special that happened to me in my experience with my undergraduate college that never would have happened had I allowed my fear to intervene and allowed myself to be present for the experience. And I can say that my undergraduate experience was truly the most transformative experience in my life. It opened a world to me that I had not seen before, that I didn't know was available to me. And it opened the door for me. But then it was incumbent on me to walk through that door. To not just sort of say lots of doors are open to you, and then you just sit there and just watch it, let the breeze come through. It's like you need to walk through that door and see what waits on the other side, or what paths are available to you on the other side. So it opens some doors for me, creates an opportunity for me that I didn't know were there. And so, when you allow yourself to be touched by the specialness of the moment, and I will just talk about today briefly. When you allow yourself to be touched by the specialness moment, the first thing that I would say is that you will then be able to honor the thirst that you have to do great things. I can't imagine that there's one of you in here today who doesn't have an image of yourself achieving great things. But those things only happen when you're present for the moment, when the door or the window to greatness opens for you. They don't happen when you're sort of on the sidelines. So you're in it today. You're off the sidelines and you're in it today. And preparing yourself to accept those opportunities for those moments. But it's also when you allow yourself to seize the specialness of the moment, you allow yourself to gracefully be present for the space that you are going to co-create with each other. And so part of the design, you all are sort of now part of the design of each other's life for the day. Your interactions with each other, your relationship, your communications, the comments that you give in response to each other's perspectives, you now have entered each other's lives. And so think about how do we do those things, and how do we do them in a graceful way. And by graceful, I mean, how do we do that in a way that allows our magnificence to show, that allows our spiritual generosity, the generosity of our souls, to be evident to each other, so that you create that nurturing and supportive and respectful and honoring space for each other as you do. And then when you allow yourself to seize the moment, you sort of let the busyness of our lives. I don't know how many of you feel like your days are so hectic. We let the busyness of our lives and sort of the clutter of our minds sort of fall away. Wouldn't that be an incredible gift? To feel like you can just sort of quiet your mind and let it be still for a moment. And imagine what then is able to enter once you've achieved that stillness. and what can't penetrate it now with all that wonderful frenetic activity that's going on. Because when we get that far away, then I think what we do is we create this openness to new knowledge. We create this space for new visions. And when you think about a vision, that's sort of these new possibilities for the future, or more clarity about the future that you prefer for yourself. Because we know there's lots of possible futures, but what is the future that you most prefer for yourself? And that's as a person, as a leader, as someone who's a very powerful relationship networks. So what is that vision for yourself? What are the possibilities that you're holding for yourself? And again, when we allow our minds to open up, then we're able to do that. And so today has the potential to be a magnificent day. Sometimes when we go to conferences, we think about that we're going to workshops, that we're going to go to be molded, as opposed to I'm going to create a design for my future. I'm going to create a more thoughtful plan for who I'm going to be in the world. To create a more hopeful outlook for the possibilities that reside for me in the future. That's what the design work, that's what I think the core of the design work is about today. While we think it's about leadership or maybe clubs and organizations, it's about how we will navigate these very complex relationship networks in which we've been entrusted with a sacred responsibility for the lives of others in a way that's going to allow you to do it in a way that's self-honoring and honoring to others. And so leadership is not a self-indulgent activity. It's an other, the word they use oftentimes, our-centric activity. It's an other-centric activity. And so today is about you and your relationship and your connection with others, and the space that's been created, the space in which you will inhabit in order to get there. And so just a little bit more about, as I come to the end of my experience at OSU, some of the things that's present. One is that leadership is more than an activity. That leadership isn't something that I just sort of show up and do and go through. Leadership is an outlook. It's a lifestyle. It's a commitment. It's a value. I mean, there are so many dimensions to what leadership is and what leadership means. But leadership is also an incredible honor. Because when people put us in leadership roles, at whatever level and whatever way we define ourselves or configure ourselves as leaders, they've entrusted us with the well-being of others. They've entrusted us with others' hopes and dreams and deep desires. They've entrusted us with the condition of others' sense of self, with the well-being of those with whom we're in leadership relationship. And so leadership is truly multi-dimensional. And it's something that we need to think profoundly about as we enter. Speaking of entering, your interest. Sure, I'll just go through it. Thank you. So why don't I'll go through the questions, and we'll read through them, and then I will, in some way, go through and just try to read them together and make sense out of it. Because the challenge, sometimes when you do a speech is when you do anything, you show up and you say, well, here's what's on my mind, and here's what I want to share. But oftentimes that says nothing about sort of what's taking up intellectual space for those whom you're speaking, what's on their minds. So thank you for your thoughtfulness and coming up with questions that hopefully reflect what's on you all's minds that you all want to hear about today. So what makes student leaders unique, and what do student leaders bring to the table? What are the qualities of good role models, leaders? And how do you lead your friends? How do you establish yourself as a leader in a group? How do you define your audience? How do you recognize your own leadership style? How do you balance leadership and management? Great question. How do you overcome weaknesses? I can do some suggestions here. How do you balance career aspirations and personal aspirations? How do you lead those who don't want to be led? When you cannot reach someone, how do you choose who to reach? And how do you create the most effective leadership team? Is it all right to sacrifice school work for leadership on a club? No. And then for student leaders in the building, we would like you to think critically about your own leadership skills. Okay. Thank you. And so what they had is they actually had 3 major questions, and the bulk of the questions are under number 2, it appears, but that could be just my reading. And so this chapter is talking about the uniqueness of student leaders. You are at an incredible juncture in your lives. I mean, you're in this role where you both, in some ways, sort of both the purveyors of knowledge, but you're also your consumers. Right? So you're in this role where you're constantly receiving instruction and receiving leadership and leadership support from others, while at the same time you're people who are providing leadership and direction for others. And I think the unique thing about being in a student leadership role is the student part. Right? It's that you have permission to learn. You have permission to not be perfect because you're still learning. You're still figuring out. You're still making sense of it. And so take advantage of that unique role that you have to be able to test and verify and realize that you can make some mistakes. And again, mistakes is a relative term, right? Because what may be a mistake for you may not be a mistake for somebody else, or what's a mistake for somebody else may not be a mistake for you. But you have the chance to take risks, you have a chance to experiment, and you have a chance to consistently get better at what it is you're doing. So trust yourself. And so as a result, that's what you bring to the table. You bring that wonder that's associated with still learning, still growing, and still developing. But you also bring with you a lived experience. Right? You are not without knowledge of the world or perspectives on how the world is functioning. So regardless of who you're at the table with, you've got a rich and informed perspective to bring. The challenge is, are you capable of trusting your voice to share that perspective? And so you have this opportunity as a student leader to be engaged in this process of leadership experimentation and growth and testing, as I said, testing and verifying your assumptions about the world, your assumptions about leadership. And you then got the license to change when it's not working for you. And so I think that, the qualities of leadership, I think you were where I left off. I think one of the most important qualities of leaders is that you've got to be committed to learning. That any of us who think that we've arrived, that we've got it figured out, and that we know, that's the first start of failing as a leader. One of the things that I consistently ask myself is, how can I be better? I love my job. I've stayed in my job for 19 years. I love my job. But I consistently ask myself, how can I want to be better at my job. And the only way to be better is to be committed to learning and be committed to growth. I think the other qualities that are really important in leadership is self-awareness. You got to know who you are. You got to know your story. And I started off sharing with you briefly a little bit about my own personal journey, my own personal story, because one of the things that we have to be really clear about and know is that who we are shows up with us in our leadership role. And what our personal history is shows up with us in our leadership role. So all the messages that I've gotten about who I am or who I'm not, all of my insecurities, all of my misinformed beliefs and judgments, they all show up in my relationships with those with whom I'm in leadership. And so I have to know, how does the weight of who I am and my history land on the organization? And how does who I am and my personal history, how does that serve the organization well? And where may it underserve organization? And so one of the things, and my colleagues have heard me say this before, and I actually shared this with my supervisor. And I was talking to him, I was saying, I need to talk to you about the ways that I think that my performance has underserved, does not serve student affairs well in the time that I've been here. And I said, I know the most significant way that I have not served the organization well is related to my background in poverty. That as a child growing up, the most difficult thing for me was to ask for money, because we didn't have any. And to ask for money, in some ways, was to break my mother's heart, because of the disappointment that she would feel in not being able to fulfill my request. So, fast forward however many years, I've been in professional student affairs for close to 40 years now, and the most difficult part of my job is asking for money. I become that child again. My personal history shows up. And so what happens then is the organization gets underserved because I don't become the advocate for resources, for money that the organization needs. So now that I'm leading, I put in tons of requests for money because I'm asking for somebody else, not for myself. Right? So I feel better asking for something for somebody else that I can't ask for myself. Or if I feel like I'm asking for myself, even though I know I'll be asking for others. Right? So each of you will have your own stories. And so one of the important qualities of leaders is you've got to know your story and you got to honor it. You got to not be ashamed of it. You not feel like it's something that you need to be regretful about. You are who you are. and you're getting better. I think it's also important for leaders, in my perspective, is to be transparent. This means to not have sort of these secret plans for the organization that nobody knows but you. That if there's a vision that you have, if there's values that you have, if there are hopes that you have, to openly share those with others. Because again, we talk about leadership is a relationship-based experience. It's not a solitary experience. And leaders need to have the capacity to listen. And I think oftentimes, if anything, is the crucial element in leadership. It's, are you capable of hearing others? Can you hear their voice? Can you hear their needs? Can you hear their perspective? And then are you capable of honoring? And what happens is that, it's really interesting, is that I think people come to leaders sometimes during this moments of vulnerability. And they will want to enlist the support of the leader. I mean, they want the leader to be on their side. And so when someone comes to you to listen, they come with the idea that this person is on my side. And that by sharing what I have to share will allow this person to be even more connected to my needs and put them in a better position to respond. And so developing this capacity to hear and to be fully present for another person's story is a very important attribute of leadership. So there's lots of other things, but I think those for me, if I had to say what are the qualities that are most important, I think it's that. I think in terms of good role model leaders, I mean, I think those qualities start. But I think that just the day-to-day, how we comport ourselves, and do people see us living a life that's congruent with the values that we espouse about who we say we are in the world. A lot of people talk about walk the talk, that sort of thing, and I'm not really fond of that notion of walking the talk. But do you just live the values that you espouse? Because one of the things that we know is that as leaders, every day, through the things we say and the things we do, we are writing our own personal narrative. You're writing the story of who others will come to know you as. And is that narrative that they're writing consistent with the narrative that you're telling? And sometimes that's by the actions that we take, but it's also sometimes by those with whom we associate. So, for example, I have people who I know and I care about deeply who often talk about the deep and rich, diverse, multicultural life that they want to live. But then when I watch those with whom they interact, it doesn't reflect that. And so this is something I was telling my son, he hates when I say it, he's a teenager, so I kind of expect him. But that your circle should reflect your desires, right? So if we communicate to people what our desires are, do they see that our words reflect our desires? Does our circle reflect our desires? Do our actions reflect our desires? And so that for me is a good role model in terms of what leadership looks like. And I go beyond role model, and I would say sort of that's maybe what a success model looks like, a model of successful leadership. Because it's not just about in that role, but it's about success in a personal journey, success in who you say you want to be. Think about it. And so this issue about how do you lead and how do you model, that really shows up when you think about how you lead in situations where those you have some close relationships with people, where you're leading within a friendship network. And we know that within an organization you will have sort of this range of relationship connections. There will be some with whom you're very close, and then there will be some with whom you're aloof. And the question is do different people in the organization get a different leader? Or does everybody in the organization get access to the same leader? And so I would think about it in this way, think about sort of with the people who we care about sometimes, when we meet to greet them, we will welcome them in and embrace. And you think about sometimes with people who you give sort of a so-so embrace, and those who you're like, yeah, you get that real strong and powerful embrace. Well, do people in the organization see that there are some people who only get the very powerful and strong embrace in terms of your leadership? Or does everybody get that? And so this leading of friends is about sort of how do you manage the relationship in a way that allows you to maintain integrity with all others. That friends don't get sort of special attention. They don't get listened to in a different way. They don't get cared about in a different way. That there's a separation between, yeah, we can be tight outside of this, and we do that. But within our group, we did think about how to make sure that I show up as a leader for you in the ways that I show up as a leader for others. And that's a very difficult thing to balance. Because that closeness does matter. You know, there's this question about sort of how do you establish yourself as a leader in the group. You know, as Tim knows, I write a regular column for this journal called the Journal of College and Character. One of the articles that I wrote a few years ago was an article called The Ethics of Entering and Leading Organizations. You know, and so you establish yourself as a leader by entering the organization gently. Oftentimes we want to enter with force, right? Because we want to show people that we deserve to be the leader. All right, I'm here. As opposed to, first of all, I want to appreciate you all for allowing me to be the leader of this organization. And I want to let you know what an honor it is. And that I will treat it as a sacred responsibility. Right? So you enter in a gentle and a thoughtful and open way. And you establish yourself that it's very difficult to lead an organization that you don't belong to. And I think you're probably saying, duh. But belong to means that you actually act like a member, not someone who's apart from the membership. It's like it's difficult to lead an organization that you're not living in. So how do you situate yourself in that organization and say, I got to be in it in order to be of it or for it? And so you start by not declaring boldly. And there's a question further down here about what if there are people who you can't lead? Okay. And so that all gets taken care of by how you enter and how you treat the organization. Because oftentimes what will happen is that we will be in an organization as leaders. You'll come in and, how many of you set goals that you want before you can start your leadership role? Okay. There's a good side and a bad side to that, right? Because sometimes you can go into your goal, but the question is, are they the organization's goals? Who else besides you owns those goals? So it's one thing to say, here's some personal goals for who I want to be as a leader. It's a different thing to say, here are my goals for the organization. Because what happens, and this is sort of one of those consistent things that we find in organizations, is that oftentimes we'll find people in an organization, the leaders will say, well, people in my organization are really apathetic. And they're really unmotivated. And then you probe a little deeply, and you'll say, well, what do you mean by unmotivated? You say, well, I have all these really great ideas, and nobody's excited about them. And so immediately what we've done is we've established the test as, I will determine how good of a member you are by how excited you get about my ideas. Okay? I think that's a pretty unfair test. So the question is, how excited can we get about our ideas? About the direction that we decided upon? And so the role of a leader, the way to establish yourself as a leader, is to establish yourself as the convener of high-stakes conversations. So the conversations that you're facilitating and that you're convening people to when you have your meetings will determine the stakes toward which you're working. The prize that you're working in pursuit of. And so it requires that you spend time in developing this ability to facilitate the group's engagement with each other around its shared hopes for the organization. Not just your own personal hopes for the organization. You know, I share with people, and this is one of the things I think about as I enter my time at the end of Oregon State University, is that if left to my own devices, I would have been a different leader here than I have been over the last 19 years. Because like those people, I came in with a real clear goal about what I think could happen in OSU. You know. But what happens sometimes is when you give yourself over to an organization and you ask yourself, the organization, who do you need me to be as a leader in order for you to be fulfilled in the work that you do? Something very different comes out. And so for me, at least, I can say the leader that I have been at OSU was actually invented by the members of our organization, invented by my colleagues. They created the leader that they needed. The leader, and I probably could have been better at that in many ways. I know I could have been better at that in many ways. But the challenge the way you take on a leadership role is, are you capable of sort of giving yourself over to the organization and letting them shape you into the leader that they need in order to fulfill who they want to be? Absolutely frightening proposition. Because we have to give up the plan. We have to give up the structure. We have to abandon the known way of being. But what I can tell you is that what gets revealed on the other side is this amazing treasure in terms of the relationships that it gives you, the energy that it can inspire, the hope that it creates. And so it's just sort of it's an amazing thing. And so when you establish yourself as a leader in a group, it's like, do you let the group establish you as a leader? Do you let them help to establish you in the group, as opposed to you establishing yourself in the group? It's a reciprocal relationship, where you're giving back and forth. There's a really question about how do you define your audience? And again, if you think back what I said, actually your audience defines itself. They tell you who they are. They tell you what they want and what matters to them. And so when you go into your group, the question is, if you're facilitating, you think about what are the questions that I can ask? What are the conversations that I can frame that can help people to help me to understand with whom I'm in relationship? And so your audience, again, by facilitating it, by being a convener, and by being fully present, that audience will reveal to you who they are. And you get out of the role of necessarily having to define them. You know, but what happens though is that once they define themselves, it creates another dilemma, right? So now that I know who they are, am I prepared to respond to them? Am I willing to respond to them? It looks like a conversation that I have with faculty. Oftentimes I notice that there's a presentation today about who today's college students are. And oftentimes we'll have this conversation with faculty and they're sort of perplexed about who you all are. So, tell me who are today's students? I don't know. But I said, you got to figure out one at a time, right? I said, there may be some generational attributes, like I was reading the other day, that you all tweet on an average, you all text on an average of 50 times a day each. So I'm sure you average out, there's some of you who like 300 times a day, and others who like, I did one, right? But that's sort of, so people know these generational attributes of who you are. But one of the things that I do say to faculty, and I think it'll apply here, is that your obligation is to teach the students who are here, not the students that you wish were here. It's the same thing for us in terms of leadership. We have to lead the people who are here, not the people who we wish were in our group. Which means that we sort of got to think about sort of who are they really, and how do we connect with them, and how do I provide leadership and we provide leadership that's truly relevant to those who are here. The question about how do you recognize your own leadership style is really an authenticity question. About how do you know what's authentically you? Well, again, that's another one of those really, really scary things, right? Because the authenticity question is, if I was to show up as a leader, as who I am, in the deepest part of my soul, who would my group get as a leader? As opposed to who would I allow myself to be as a leader? And what is the safest person that I'm going to give them as a leader? So sometimes you may not want to necessarily know what your real leadership style is, because that is the most vulnerable place to be. But if you are committed to being the most authentic leader possible, it's going to come by tapping into who you really are and who you desire to be in the world. And so are you the leader who's emotionally open and emotionally present? Or are you the person, the question following that is how do you manage leadership and management, right? Are you the person who wants to sort of manage the group? Or are you the person who wants to lead the group? Which leadership is helping other people to create positive outcomes for themselves, putting other people in a position to be successful. So it's that challenge that you find out your own leadership style and your unique leadership style by tapping into those unique aspects of your own humanity and figuring out how do you let that show up at the table when you show up, or let that come in the room with you when you come in. What I can tell you is the first time I decided that I was actually going to allow affect, emotion, to be a part of my leadership, I was shaking. Because, I come out of this background, and you just show up, you keep a straight face. You don't get too high, you don't get too low, you just sort of keep a straight face and play the game. Right? That was sort of my approach to life for a really long time. But then I discovered, and again, it happened when you sort of are present for a moment, for that special moment. I discovered that from a colleague that somebody expected that when I showed up, that my heart would also be in the Lord. And I also discovered that I felt better as a leader when I showed in the room and my heart showed with me. But that was really scary. It's gotten less so. I also need, I probably should have done this confession at the beginning, is that, you're getting a speech from an introvert. so, this is like really, really hard for me to stand here and do this, and it's really hard to stand here and to talk about emotions. But that's at the heart of leadership. You can't do it. It's really, I love the art of leadership, with Don many years ago, because when you think about art, it's so like, that's a person's heart on the canvas. They've given us their heart, what's in their heart at that moment. It's not just what's in their head, it's what's in their heart. And they put it on the canvas. Whether that canvas is through dancing, or whether it's through music, or whatever. Which is why, so much of the music is about pain. It was really interesting. Several weeks ago, we took our son to Portland to the music, American Idiot. And so listening to all the Green Day music, and it's like all this angst, but it's sort of like, that was a lot of heart stuff going on there. In terms of all the pain and all the fears and all the stuff that goes with you. But heart is really, really important part for leadership, and I think it's a part of that. And so this issue about balancing between leadership and management, the simple way that I balance it in my own head is that I lead people and I manage things. I manage the budget, I manage facilities, I manage my time. I don't manage people. People want to be led. And so the challenge is that when you find yourself managing people, there's sort of a slippery slope there. So management is a very, very important tool for all those instrumental aspects of the organization. Make sure that we get your rosters in on time, that you do all the work that's associated with getting your group registered, and you don't want to miss any of that stuff. Those are management tasks. But responding to the needs of the organization, listening to people, creating a vision, those are all leadership related activities. And so I was just suggested you try to think about how do you keep those things clear in your mind between those. Again, hopefully I got to the part about how do you lead those who don't want to be led. I think people don't want to be managed. I think the difference between sort of how do you manage people who don't want to be managed can sometimes be confused with leading people who don't want to be led. Because I think leadership is an activity of inspiration. And I think everybody wants to be inspired. And so if there's a question about how do you inspire somebody who doesn't want to be inspired, it'd be like, ain't no way. But I can't imagine if there's a person who doesn't want to be inspired. Now sometimes people have trouble getting the clutter out of the way in order to experience the inspiration or the potential for inspiration. But people want to be inspired. Just like everybody wants to be embraced, everybody wants to be cherished, but in different ways, right? And so the question is, how do you nuance your leadership to think about the different ways that people may need to be led, that people need to be inspired? And again, it's sort of the same thing about, when you can't reach everyone, how do you decide who to reach? I think, again, when you reach out and when you inspire, you will touch those who are in a position to be touched. And it's about your presence. If you're fully present, you will reach and you will touch those who are in that constellation, who are open and ready for a relationship with you. And the hard thing to understand as a leader is that as a leader, you don't necessarily have to touch everyone, but can you create an organization in which everybody is touched by somebody? And so it's that network that says we have an organization where everyone has access to a deep and meaningful connection with some other person in our organization, person or persons in our organization. Because you sort of give yourself this awesome responsibility that I have to reach everybody. No, you construct a relationship network in which everyone has the opportunity to be touched and to be reached, which then sort of takes some of the weight off of you as a leader. And how do you create the most effective leadership team? It goes back to the conversation that I had earlier around how do you get people enlisted in a shared high-stakes conversation. How do you facilitate that conversation that gets people to mutually agree upon the destination that they want to pursue, as opposed to how you convince them to go where you want them to go. And so a team is this ability of people who sort of are committed to a shared direction and collective action. And that's the conversation that as a leader you will pursue. This question about is it all right to sacrifice schoolwork for leadership or a club? Student leader. The reason you're in the role is because of your student status. And there should be nothing more important. The reason the university exists is because we give degrees. I often remind people. And all these other activities are enriching experiences. There are additional opportunities for you to grow and to learn, to enhance what you get from your curricular experience. And I think that it would be an unfortunate leadership experience that would put such a burden on any individual that they would feel a need to sacrifice their academic success or progress or development for the sake of an out-of-the-classroom experience. And so I would just say, think long and hard about making that type of trade-off. That more, it may be, I would suggest, is to have some role negotiations and some expectation adjustment with those in your organization if you feel like the burden of your organization, the burden of your leadership is such that it impinges upon your ability to do what I hope will be the primary reason that you come here, which is to have a successful academic career. And then, what would you like to think about critically for your own leadership skills? And so this is sort of, I guess these are sort of my closing thoughts in terms of what I'd like for you to think about. I would like for you to think about what would it mean for those in your organization? What would it mean for those in your relationship constellation if you were to unleash your brilliance and the full force of your humanity within the context of that organization? What would it mean if they were to get you at your most brilliant and your most human self on a regular basis? What would that mean for you in terms of who you would free yourself up to be and give yourself permission to be And what would it mean for others in terms of not just what they would experience, but who they would get permission to be? When I think about the condition of the world right now, and think about the incredible need that we have for healing of individual lives and communities, I would take a lot of that back to the fact that people's spirits have been diminished. People's brilliance has been stifled. And people's humanity has been suppressed. And that as leaders, you are in this incredible role to be healing agents. You're the ones who have the ability to heal and to repair and to reconstruct the places where people are injured, where communities are broken, and where individual lives are wounded, our society is wounded. But it's only going to come about by you unleashing all that's within you that has that magnificent power associated with it. Thank you very much.